Okay, so welcome, first of all, to our session around what we've learned in DevOps transformation within TD. We'll take you through some of the things that we've experienced and the partnership between TD Bank Group and our insurance arm and Deloitte. Our friends are here today too. Okay, who am I? I'm Norm Means. I'm at TD Bank. I'm responsible for the deployment of our services in the DevOps world. Fawzy and I are here today to present with you, and we'll walk you through a bit of our journey and take you through some of our learnings. Just a point, the notes aren't coming up on the slide deck here. That'd be helpful. Better. Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, 3 years ago we began this journey. Actually, there's somebody in the audience that began this journey 3 years ago from TD. Thanks for being here, Lori. We began the journey to re-platform the entire insurance environment, and I'm going to take you through some details around that. As I mentioned, we're going to walk through. So I think I may have went 2 slides there. Back up. Okay, no, it's the right one. All right, so a bit about TD Bank and the insurance and how we fit in. TD Bank is a top 10 North American bank. We have about 1.2 trillion assets, and that pairs in the comparison to some of the other presenters that have been up here. We're a tiny Canadian bank compared to everyone else. 85,000 employees and 22 million customers worldwide. Uncommonly known fact about TD is we actually have more stores and branches, ATMs, in the US than we do in Canada. So our acquisition of Eastern financial companies have allowed us to grow into the US footprint. So we're here as well, not on the west side yet. So TD offers a very diverse set of products across the organization, and my role in this organization, as I mentioned, is the segment technology executive for wealth insurance. And what that means is we're actually taking the code from the developers, we're bringing it from the development environments all the way into prod, and that's a big change for us because in the past we've had handoffs that have occurred, and we've actually taken code and only deployed it when it gets closer to production in the pre-production environments in production. So we're trying to eliminate some of those gaps through some of this process. All right, so insurance, a bit about the insurance piece of the bank. We're largely formed on a series of acquisitions, and because of that, we've made ourselves a very complex technology environment in the back end. And that means that every bit of legacy that existed with those old acquisitions still exists today. And this re-platform is allowing us to revisit all those technologies, revisit the code, invoke some microservice capabilities, and provide more resiliency through APIs and many other different things. So fundamentally, our GPS transformation program is allowing us to improve our customer experience. And at TD, we try and drive to what the customer expects, and we call that legendary. So we're trying to provide legendary service to our customers. We're modernizing the application to make sure that we can meet or exceed those customer expectations and make the acquisition of services very simple for our online customers and make the interaction with our employees to the customer very, very simple. I'll ask you one question. Maybe I can get a show of hands to be able to see and try and step out of the light here, but I don't know if that's possible. How many of you actually know how far the nearest fire hydrant is to your house? A couple. Good for you. How about the age of your house? How many years ago was it built? Easier for the people who bought new houses, so I can see all the new home buyers out there. What about the nearest fire station? It's pretty good. What we don't want to do, obviously, is ask customers that information when they're buying insurance from us. So we'd like to be able to pull an API and grab the information that's available. I personally just purchased a house in the summer, no idea what year it was built. I looked at the real estate agent. Of course, they give you the gap saying it's going to be built from 1985 to 2004. So how do you know to tell your insurance company that question? How old is your furnace? All those things are going to be more available in the future. And as we build the convenience for customers, we're going to have access to this information, obviously depending on the confines and the PII that we're pulling. But we'll try and gather as much of the information from the customer as they call in, rather than having to ask them those questions. I remember going down and looking to see how old my water heater was. Couldn't really tell, right? I'm sure the experts can tell, but I couldn't do that. So intentionally, we're trying to improve the customer experience, access to information, and obviously save some time. So our program for GPS basically has been a journey so far. We've been on this road for 2.5 years now. Another few years to go. As you know, it takes a significant amount of time to replace or re-platform, or as we call it, change the engine on the jet in flight. We don't want to break anything because the legacy systems are complex in nature, and the newer systems still need to pull data from the older systems. So there's a lot of interdependencies between the two of them. Our intention, of course, is to drive system updates through the delivery lifecycle. So if we get to a point where we're releasing software, right now we're monthly, every month and a half, we're coming up with a release. We would like to get to a point where we're releasing every week to launch new features. The business wants something, we could actually give it to them very quickly, and that's the intention of some of the programs we're in. Obviously, we're trying to drive exceptional customer experiences. We talked about the legacy environments and sunsetting them. One other point I wanted to add here on the sunset of legacies, and I mentioned this in a couple of conversations I've had in the roundtables. The big thing we're running into is the actual vulnerabilities associated with these old legacy platforms. There's an unwillingness to invest the money from the business perspective in the platform until there's a burning platform. And because of vulnerabilities, struts as an example, I think everybody's probably encountered something with that, is really driving some different behaviors and forcing us to make changes there. We're leveraging the global delivery presence of Deloitte to help us with that 724 capability. We also have many different teams from a streams perspective engaged in an insurance platform like this. I'm sure other federated IT models out there have experienced something similar. We'll have a channels team that's responsible for the customer interface components, whether that's the tools or systems the people use who are actually interacting with our customer, or the customer directly from an online channel perspective. That would be a different business unit in our case. And so in the case of Deloitte, they've got to pull together all those teams to be able to get one response, because it is one application, it's one feeling, right? It's one interface to the public and to our customers. And of course, there's a lot of back-end data that they have to connect to. So that's the multiple streams component. Of course, we call that ability to serve digital, phone channel, your mobile, your online capability, even TTY and other functions is accessible cases. We call that the omni-channel. So we want to be able to access whatever channel, whatever way a customer wishes to interface with us. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Fawzy, and he's going to take you through some more of the business context on GPS.
Well, thank you, Norm. As Norm introduced me at the beginning, my name is Fawzy Mana. I am a technical lead with Deloitte. And my part of the project, the GPS project, is helping enable some of the DevOps practices and capabilities that we want to see embedded in the program. And like you would have heard earlier, that projects don't necessarily learn. So we want to do our very best to ensure that whatever we learn in the context of this project do get embedded back to the rest of the organization, so we truly have a true learning organization. So speaking of learning, when we started the release 2 of this program, one of the first things that we looked at is, well, what can we learn from release 1? Fair, right? So the first thing that we kind of looked at is, what are some of those repeat problems that we had back then that we can learn from? And instead of kind of looking at all kinds of problems that we could solve for at once, which kudos to the team in release 1, there were many continuous improvement initiatives happening in parallel, a ton. So that wasn't the problem. It was almost a reverse problem. There were too many of them. So to an outsider, the impact is really minimal. So we wanted to look at what are the ways we can increase the impact of ops practices and capabilities have on the project. So we wanted to focus and concentrate our effort on where it really mattered. So what it came down to is really 2 high-level problem statements, one around speed and the other one around quality. And underpinning the speed pillar, we really needed to identify what the root causes, so we're very focused in terms of where we apply those improvements. So on the speed aspect, the issues or the root causes underpinning the speed aspect were related to reliability problems we had with tooling. The developer wants to go push a code package, or the operation team needed to provision another environment. The tools would not be reliable enough for their usage in a consistent fashion. So that was a problem for us. And the other problem that we had is, like Norm said, there's a lot of legacy systems involved. As you can appreciate, an organization as large as TD would have a ton of systems, right? And in insurance as well, a lot of acquisitions and so on and so forth. So you can appreciate the complexity with mainframes, data warehouses, and so on and so forth that we had to deal with. There were about 80 legacy systems that we had to replicate environment to environment. So you can appreciate the level of complexity there. So we had to go enable those systems. On the quality aspect, we had a great delivery pipeline and a great QA strategy, but they were not really connected well. So that was a big problem. So the feedback loop was really missing. So we needed to go solve for that. And QA was treated as a function, meaning the developers would kind of be like, hey, we'll worry about it in stabilization. The QA team will take care of it. Instead of kind of everybody owning the problem as soon as it's discovered. So we needed to go address for that as well. So before I tell you about what we did, or I want to tell you about what we accomplished before I talk about how we got there. So the accomplishment I'm most proud of is the fact that we got so many working teams in this enablement group. Norm and I made a pledge that we're not going to have silos. Even though, a lot of the conversations that were had at the conference were about, vendor management and, silos and how are you going to get the vendor to work with you hand in hand and so on and so forth. But it wasn't just about the TD and Deloitte working together. At TD, it's a federated model, right? It's a large organization with so many business units, as Norm described earlier, which means that there are teams. Some of these teams sit in the enterprise, some of them sit in TD Insurance. So we needed to bring all the relevant teams responsible or taking part in enablement into one working group, because otherwise it would have been very hard to work in a siloed fashion to deliver any sort of enablement at all. So that's what I'm most proud of. And, the other thing is the scale of this program was huge, and we needed to scale the development ability and how much we can do in parallel. So we had to create a whole bunch of net new development environments. And so even in comparison to release 1. But that comes with its own challenge because, like I said, there were so many mainframes and legacy systems. So if you want to go create another dev environment, you needed to go replicate mainframes and data warehouses and things like that are nasty. And that would have been problematic. So what we did instead, we found a way to create a flexible environment model where we use things like service virtualization to our advantage, for example, where we go mock and stub some of those downstream dependencies and avoid some of the reliability problems that even come with third-party vendors too. If you reach a sandbox for the purpose of testing, sandbox is not available, the data is not there. If you mock and stub that, your flexibility from an environment, delivery, and management perspective becomes much, much, much easier. Lastly, we really needed to tackle testing from both the functional aspect and the non-functional aspect. And for example, we wanted to catch issues earlier in the life cycle and avoid doing customer-driven testing in production or in higher-level environments, because the reality is it takes a lot more to fix issues in SIT or in PAT or it takes them or in performance environments than it takes to fix those issues in dev. Right? So it's much easier, much less costly, and so on and so forth to fix issues then. So that's when we want to discover them and do something about them. So we were able to improve that by 25% up until now, and we're working on the next iteration of that now, as well as we had to do a lot of re-architecture because we were introducing net new systems. So it didn't make sense to kind of say, yeah, keep the architecture as is. We're not going to touch that. The untouchables, you can't do anything about it. So we didn't want to do that. We wanted to kind of open up the architecture diagrams and kind of see where were the opportunities that existed to ensure that we're not adding technical debt as we're adding these net new components as part of release 2. So these were some of the accomplishments along the way. In terms of how we got there, so like I said, we had seven teams as part of this working group, so we needed a way to bring people together. So we had a daily stand-up between, there were a lot of people on it, at the beginning, and then slowly but surely we kind of knew who were the movers and shakers that needed to really be there. But the idea is people needed a forum to meet, and that in of itself is a great accomplishment, believe it or not, because some people just don't know each other. The relationships have not been formed. So you need a forum to do that, to just bring people together, the same people, introduce them, and see how they can help one another. You need a forum where people can collaborate and raise issues. And you would have heard in yesterday's talk and the main track in the evening how that is important. You need a way to discover issues as soon as they arrive and publicize them and reach for help. So our stand-up was a forum in the working group amongst these different teams as a way to do that. Instead of I have my own problem and I cover it up and nobody knows about it until it becomes a fire. And at that point, it's too late, really. So for the sake of accountability, we had to identify single points of contact to ensure that it's, yes, collaboration is amazing, but what about accountabilities? Because at the end of the day, we needed to progress things along. And if people were not taking some of these responsibilities and taking ownership of some of these aspects, then it's problematic to move the needle. So we really needed to identify those owners within the working group who were responsible to get some of these things moving along. So like I said, this whole thing, this enablement exercise is in the context of the GPS project. And what that really meant is we had to really align our timelines with the project timelines. We don't want to give them features. We don't want to spend 6 months building a feature, and by the time we deliver it, it's too late. Or nobody needs it anymore. Or it's the wrong feature at that point. So we really needed to do a lot of upfront work and to ensure that we're aligning with the project team and see what they need to be closer to our customer, per se, right? And ensure that they understand what we're enabling them to do, and vice versa, have that feedback loop as well. So some of the technical aspects that we fulfilled, like I said, we created a flexible environment model whereby we use virtual services and technologies like CA versus service virtualization, for example, mocking and stubbing techniques, sharing of legacy components where some components were not, like I said, in the GPS ecosystem, there's 100+ components, 80 of them are considered legacy systems. And what that meant is some of these systems were not being changed as part of the release. So why do we need to go replicate them when we didn't need to and rack up a lot of additional costs? So we had some sharing arrangement amongst those systems in addition to the stuff we did around service virtualization. And that helped reduce the cost as well and provide a compelling case for why it was justified to increase the number of development and testing environments that were available to scale the level of development and testing that was done in the program. Lastly, we really brought testing closer into the pipeline because, like I said, testers were kind of running their tests, and the CI/CD was chugging along, agnostic of that, which didn't make any sense. And the whole idea was here to start embedding, security, non-functional testing, functional verification into the various points in the software delivery stages from the very beginning, from the second somebody just does a code commit in Git, a flow would kick off, would do unit testing, static code analysis, security profiling, performance profiling, and then we would go into the first environment and would do little bits of testing in a progressive fashion. Because I'm sure all enterprises have this problem whereby people are like, I'm not going to wait for a 2-hour regression suite to run every time I do a deployment. That doesn't make sense. Of course it doesn't. And so what we needed to do is introduce levels of verifications that made sense for where we are context dependent or where we are in the software development lifecycle and which environment we were hitting and so on and so forth. Lastly, the program started a few months ago, and we started reaping some of the rewards, like I said earlier, but by no means we're done yet. We're still really very much in the journey, and there's a lot more that we're going to talk about shortly that we're planning to do. So to wrap my part here, the things that really helped make an impact are these 3 things. So I already talked about the integrated working group, and just to bring up an example to highlight the importance of this one, if a vice president of group XYZ was really concerned about the work we were doing, we would tell the person respectfully, please attend our stand-up. Happy to hear from you. No, not a separate meeting, not a separate forum where we kill more of the team's time. No, attend the daily stand-up. If another team, a stakeholder, wanted to be actively involved, beautiful. Attend the daily stand-up. And it became a norm for us to bring people together to this one forum, and people just know. You just go to the 9:30. You go to the 9:30. If you have a question, if you have an idea, if you have a little bit of input to give, go to the 9:30. And this wasn't for any one of the separate streams, it was for the working group. So that instead of doing a major reorg or anything like that, we obviously wanted a way to really do this and do this fast. So this was a way for us to do this in a very effective fashion. Fast and iterative. Who here thinks they know all the answers to DevOps enablement? It's very hard to have a confidence level where you say, we know everything. The strategy that we write on day 1 is going to be there on day 100. It doesn't work like that. And what needs to happen is, you can't do agile enablement in a waterfall fashion. If you're enabling a lean way of working, you need to do it in a lean way, and that enablement. And thus, we operate in sprints. We have small batches to execute these things with a feedback loop, and we'll go back to the leadership team and say, yes, we pivoted on strategy, and that was okay. It's okay to change plans. It's fine. And I know at the beginning, that used to be very hard for people to say, oh, you need to change, the timelines are going to be shifted. So that was a bit of a problem, and it caused friction in the beginning, but really people understood the benefit of it, that if we all closed our ears and we just kept going and delivered the wrong features at the end, or we did the strategy was not really as good as what it could have been, then that was going to be really a problem. So we're all here to learn, and that was key in our success so far. Lastly, active leadership support. And this was on multiple fronts. Number one, to kind of enable the team, not to add more problems on the team, to truly, there is a blocker, there's an impediment, let's alleviate that. And that was the role of the leadership team. If there was a forum they needed to attend with senior leadership to go advocate for us, they would go and do that. And that kind of an activist leadership, if you will, is really, really crucial. Because otherwise what would happen is, the enablement team's day-to-day would be a living hell, and then that would be problematic. So the leadership really understood the need to go advocate on behalf of the working group, and go sometimes and ask the CIO for certain things and the CTO for certain things. And that's what really helped things keep going. Otherwise, it would have been really problematic. And obviously also exert influence outside of the working group too. Not just up top, but there's a lot of other groups that were not necessarily in the working group day to day. And that was okay, but we needed leadership support to help exert influence in those areas. And because we had that, we were able to really move along. Otherwise, it would have been really challenging. So I want to hand it back to Norm to talk to us about some of the things that we learned so far. Because it's been already a long journey, but we have a lot to go through, and it'd be a shame if we didn't incorporate some of these things into our journey as we go along. Norm, back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Fawzy. OK, so a couple of key points here to wrap up. And I know I'm sitting between you and lunch, and I got a few minutes left here to go, so I'll be quick. So one of the biggest points was, in DevOps, you have to address your constraints and your bottlenecks. And in the past, a lot of teams just complained about many things. As Fawzy mentioned, the daily stand-up provides an opportunity from everybody from rank and file to executive to be on those calls. If somebody has a problem, then they can bring those problems there, and we can work through it, and we can resolve the issue, and we can get it. Same goes with ideas. If you've got an idea to try and fix something, it actually works quite well. So, but if you don't address them, what the image portrays is it's kind of hard to get that bowling ball through that little pipe if you don't have the ability to iterate and to understand how you're going to drive continuous improvement. And those have been a couple of the key learnings for us as far as we've come so far. And keep in mind, we're nowhere near end of job, so we're not saying this is complete yet. As I mentioned earlier, our deployments still take a significant amount of time to get from dev to prod, but we're working toward making that faster. So a few things from a next steps and challenges perspective. Big one here, automating the developer setup, including the actual literal developer setup, meaning getting them on board. One of the challenges we have, of course, in the federated model, as I mentioned earlier, as well as the fact that we've got a significant amount of legacy technology, onboarding new people into that environment, and it makes it even more complicated if it's a third party like our partners Deloitte. Privilege is a big challenge in a regulated company, as you all know, if you participate in that space. So that's one big thing. And then giving the ability to the developer to actually fix a problem in a dev environment is key. So if there's a problem with a VM, just let them blow it up and build a new one, because they're just losing a few hours work, and hopefully they got some of the code saved, but we'll just rebuild the infrastructure for them in no time. We can do that today. Continue exploring the use of public cloud. So we've dabbled a little bit in public cloud. We are putting this on our TD private cloud at this point. Initially, we looked at using a cloud provider to drop the software in, and we ran into some challenges around that about our internal DevOps pipeline capability to deliver for that specific piece, as well as the ability for us to know and put specific pieces of data like PII or SOX data in the public cloud. That's, we weren't quite ready to do that yet. Not saying we won't be ready in one of our future releases, but we put that off. And then extending CD beyond the QA region. We talked a little bit about this. Eliminate that handoff. So instead of going from dev into lower environments, into the SID environment with one team and then handing off to another team to take it beyond, we're going to build that knowledge. DBAs, middleware, all the rest of the people are going to be involved right from day one, right through completion, and tie into our DevOps, our prod operations team, cloud ops, and make sure we can handle the solutions from an end-to-end perspective. And the last one is developers and testers, the ability to rely on shared services and do more on their own. So wanted to thank you and appreciate the time to be able to sit in front of you or stand in front of you and explain what we've done. Our ask to you is, if you have examples, or if you're working in an organization that has a federated IT model and you have a fair amount of regulation, like a bank, or I'm sure healthcare services and utilities have some of the same challenges, we'd love to talk to you. We're experiencing a number of challenges, as you've heard. We're knocking them down, but and conversely, if we can help you in some of our learnings, we'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you offline. Thanks very much.